The United States is out of money for Ukraine, unable to send the ammunition and missiles that the government in Kyiv desperately needs to fend off Russia's invasion. With the aid caught up in domestic politics, the Biden administration on Tuesday came empty-handed for the first time as host of the monthly meeting of about 50 nations that coordinate support for Ukraine. The group was established by Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin in April of 2022. But while the U.S.'s financial support is in question, some have pointed out that there is another way Ukraine could get the funding it so desperately needs. The U.S. and its allies are looking for a legal way to unfreeze $300 billion in Russian central bank funds sitting mostly in Europe and using them for the benefit of Ukraine. Joining us now to discuss what can be done with the $300 billion is Bill Browder, CEO of Hermitage Capital and the head of the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign. Bill, thank you very much for joining us on Forum Daily.
Great to be here.
We know that the $300 billion is mostly sitting in Europe right now. Where exactly is this money, and what is the process of unfreezing it and sending it to Ukraine?
So roughly 220 billion of the 300 billion is sitting at a place called Euroclear. Euroclear is in Belgium. It's a place where bonds are held. This is Russian-owned bonds that have matured are held, and this would be the lion's share of the money. Is this money sitting in Belgium? Now, the process of getting this money is not clear because it's never been done before.
Mm-hmm.
There have been wars fought, damages created, and money confiscated in the past after World War II, after Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. But all that money was confiscated after the war was over. This would be the first time that money would be confiscated while the war is going on. And so there is no clear playbook to follow, but it's pretty obvious based on the money that's been withheld from the United States, money that's been offered from the European Union, which has also been held up, that Ukraine needs the money. And because the West is sitting on 300 plus billion of Russian money, that would be a great solution to this problem.
In terms of how the money is spent, is the proposal to unfreeze the money and send the money directly to Ukraine and have them purchase the weapons that they need? Or is the proposal to have the money unfrozen and have countries who support Ukraine buy those weapons and send them? Or does it make a difference?
Well, first of all, I should say that up until very recently, up until this time when everybody is looking at the financial aid being withheld, the idea was that the money, the central bank reserves that were frozen, would be used for the reconstruction of Ukraine. That was the original proposal. That was the original idea.
Mm-hmm.
And now, because we're looking at a situation where Ukraine could potentially lose the war if they don't have weapons and financial support, it's now just becoming an acceptable idea to not just use the money for reconstruction, but use it for the defense of Ukraine. And I don't think that there is any sort of laid out path or mechanism for how that would happen. I think that the Western governments would have a very clear idea that the money should be monitored carefully and closely, that there should be checks and balances at every different place so the money doesn't get stolen. And beyond that, I think that these are all decisions that governments will need to make. But these are that would be what I call a high class problem. We have to get over the general reluctance to launch into this new area. There's a lot of people within certain governments that don't want to do this because it's never been done before. People are afraid that it sets a dangerous precedent, so on and so forth.
On that note, the Associated Press reported last week that some worry that unfreezing these funds would set that new precedent in weaponizing global finance. What do you make of that argument? We have about 40 seconds before we go to break.
Well, I would say that argument has already come and gone. By freezing this money, we've already weaponized global finance, and it should be weaponized. You have a country doing terrible things, lobbing bombs into a innocent neighbor, they don't deserve to have the protection of their financial reserves. Russia is at war, and when you're at war, strange things happen, and this is one of those things.
Bill, before the break, we were talking about the weaponization of global finance. How common is it for central bank reserves to be held outside of the country in which that central bank is located? Because I would assume that that would be the crux of some of the fear of actually unfreezing this money and distributing it.
Well, so who holds central bank reserves in other currencies? And it's generally big exporting countries that have what they call current account surplus. So China, Saudi Arabia.
Yep.
These are good examples. UAE. These are countries that have surplus money that they've generated through exports. And if they were to bring that money back to their own country, first of all, their currencies would appreciate dramatically and their exports would become uncompetitive.
Yeah.
Secondly, oftentimes they don't trust their own country. They would prefer to keep their money, safe in the West in hard currency. And so particularly countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and other big oil exporters. There's an argument that some naysayers to this $300 billion confiscation idea, which is that if the U.S. were to confiscate Russia's central bank reserves in the U.S., that countries like China and Saudi Arabia and others wouldn't want to hold dollars anymore. But it's very hard to make an argument that if the U.S. and the EU and the U.K. and Canada and Japan and Switzerland all made this decision together, that nobody would want to hold any of those currencies anymore because there would be no hard currencies left.
Yeah. And on that note, you included Canada in that list. You recently met with Canada's finance minister, Chrystia Freeland. What has Canada's response been to the push to unfreeze these funds?
Well, Canada has been a big leader, primarily because of Chrystia Freeland, who understands these issues and is a big and robust supporter of Ukraine. Canada is a leader and has actually moved forward legislation to confiscate Russian money. There's something called the Foreign Asset Repurposing Act, which was passed in Canada a few years ago by a number of lawmakers that I've worked closely with. Mm-hmm. However, Canada doesn't have any Russian central bank reserves. I think Russia understood probably early on that Canada would be a big friend of Ukraine, and so there's I believe like 134 Canadian dollars worth of Russian central bank reserves. So Canada can be a symbolic leader in this case, but as we discussed at the very beginning, the lion's share of the money, more than 200 billion, is being held in Belgium, and Belgium is not a country known for its robust international leadership, and so I think that ultimately it will be a decision that has to be taken by the European Union as to what to do with that money.
And I mean, our government in Canada has been, as you alluded to, a strong supporter of Ukraine against Russia's invasion. But why, in your view, is it important for Ukraine's allies to continue to aid them?
Well, it's very simple. That Putin has the intention of taking over Ukraine, but that's not where he stops. If Putin succeeds in Ukraine, then he moves on to other countries. And the most obvious countries he moves on to would be the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, or perhaps Poland. And our problem in the West is that if he goes after those countries, they're members of NATO. And as members of NATO, then we're faced with a terrible decision. Do we go directly to war with Russia and end up losing lives of many thousands of our own soldiers? Or do we abandon our NATO commitments, which means that Putin has free rein to take over most of Europe? Either of those options will eventually lead to what I would consider the Third World War. And so this is a much cheaper alternative than to allow that to happen.
With a minute to go here, I'd like to shift gears a little bit in terms of the companies who may be complicit in funding Putin's war in Ukraine. You recently tweeted that Apple agreed to pay a $12 million fine to a Russian regulator and asked the question, why is Apple still doing business in Russia? Who else is still operating in Russia in terms of the big companies we know of that may be indirectly funding the war chest?
Well, there's a famous Yale professor named Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, and he keeps a running tally of who's out and who's still in, and the list is I'm afraid longer than one would be happy with. We all heard about corporations, evacuating and getting out of Russia, but as we've seen, and I thought Apple was out until I saw this story, and I was pretty upset by that. Um, I mean, I don't know what they're thinking, but whatever they're thinking, being in Russia, whatever benefit they get from being in Russia is far outweighed by the negative reaction just to that tweet that I put out there, let alone the general public opinion. They have a very valuable company, and they shouldn't be getting involved in this type of stuff, and nor should anybody else for that matter. I recently met an executive from Google, and he told me that YouTube still operates in Russia, but he told me that they don't accept any advertising revenue, and I think that's probably an acceptable solution because people do get information from YouTube, which is valuable, and as long as they're not making any money, and Russia is not making any money, then that's probably a good thing. But if Apple is busy paying fines to the Russian government, something's got to be stopped and looked at.
Bill, I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.